This is an ODB Films production. Visit odbfilms.com today.
In Latin, Renovo means to renew, restore, or revive. This show is all about growing in our understanding and practice of faith. Past episodes are available wherever you like to listen to podcasts. I'm Doug Tuke, the Vice President of Ministry Advancement at ODB Films. It's my new title, my little promotion. And today, we'll talk about a pretty hot topic, which I'm excited about. We're going to talk about what it means to be a pro-life Catholic. And I hope politically this makes you very uncomfortable, because those of you who are really dedicated to either side of the aisle are going to find that Catholic teaching on life doesn't do that, that it doesn't really politically ally itself. And that should actually affect you. You should be like, oh, I should read more. I need to think about that when I vote exclusively a certain way and whatnot. And I hope I get some good emails after this, because some of you are really adamant on one side or the other politically, but you just are not necessarily dialed into this notion that the church thinks so broadly when it comes to life and is equally dedicated to its sanctity. And that's what the show's about, to clarify maybe for a lot of you what that even means. What does it mean to be a pro-life Catholic? So the numbers are in. In 2018, abortion was the number one killer at 42 million deaths, which is actually down from the average between 2010 and 2016. But that's not what the show is just about. It's not just about abortion. It's about pro-life. There were 25 capital punishment deaths in the U.S. in 2018 as well. And this is the criticism. This is it. This is the critique of the pro-choice, pro-abortion movement, is you just don't care about life after birth. So congratulations for those of us who totally politically ally ourselves to the anti-abortion movement and don't give a crap about caring for people after they're born. That's where we feed the opposition. But where we celebrate life from cradle to the grave, both its sanctity and its quality, that's where we actually really live the Catholic teaching. So that's what we're going to go into. Now, it's generally assumed that the pro-life movement in America grew out of the Supreme Court's 1973 decision in Roe v. Wade. And that's just really not true. Long before Roe v. Wade, long before Roe, pro-abortion forces were working in the legislatures of several states, and pro-life organizations had already been formed to resist them, not to say anything about capital punishment and its extremely long history in the United States and the church's, I would say, regional opposition to it. However, a lot of these groups were not the first ones to work in opposition to abortion specifically. So in the mid-60s, many of the more activist-oriented civil rights leaders were really alerting their followers that the efforts to legalize abortion were part of a larger agenda designed to reduce or to eradicate minority populations. And primarily, these people were associated with organizations like the Black Panther Party and the Nation of Islam. By the 1960s and early 70s, the actions of some of these groups had actually caused them to become marginalized in the minds of most Americans. And then their warnings about the connection between racism and the legalization of abortion were totally ignored. Totally ignored. So by the end of 1972, when a lot of the pro-life organizations had been formed, with the vast majority being either associated with Catholic organizations or at least run by Catholic people, that's where we kind of get momentum. However, when the Supreme Court issued Roe v. Wade in 73, the conventional wisdom within the media and really the political community became that the abortion issue was settled. It was settled once and for all. And again, this is not talking about capital punishment yet. We're going to get into that. This is the abortion issue and how it was perceived back then, its history. So these quote unquote experts believe that this kind of fledgling pro-life movement in the late 70s would basically just see the futility of their cause and simply fade away. And of course, that never happened. The movement really continued to grow. By the mid-1980s, however, it had become a little bit stagnant. So on the political front, support for the pro-life position was widespread, but it was mostly just kind of rhetorical. And this meant that any kind of meaningful legislative progress was really spotty at best. Meanwhile, the abortion industry's business model seemed to be in really good shape, and the abortion rate was climbing. Now, about the same time, there was a renewed attention to a way of approaching a litany of tons of thorny social and political issues. It's called the consistent ethic of life. So this ethos was basically made famous in the 1980s by Cardinal Joseph Bernardin. It was crafted at a time when abortion, the death penalty, and nuclear war were forefront on the minds of a lot of Catholics. Now today, some bishops, including Cardinal Joseph Tobin, Bishop Gerald Kakanis, They say the consistent ethic or quote unquote seamless garment approach to how Catholics operate in the public square could be especially helpful as the church grapples with issues like migration, healthcare, and even taxes. And that's the direction we really want to go today, okay? So Stephen P. Millies, he's the director of the Bernardin Center at Catholic Theological Union in Chicago. He's a biographer of the late Archbishop. He said that then Archbishop Bernardin used the phrase consistent ethic of life as early as 1976 as he struggled with how the church should approach social issues in light of the Supreme Court's decision in Roe v. Wade to legalize abortion just a couple of years prior. It's a decision that Bernardin called evil 4 times in a single paragraph immediately after the court handed down its ruling. So he was all over how disgusting and awful this abortion ruling was. Now, during the first presidential election following Roe in 1976, Archbishop Bernardin was president of the U.S. Bishops' Conference. He feared, quote, abortion could completely take over the American Catholic political engagement. And as a result, he was very conscious of trying to find a way to make sure that everything else didn't get lost. And this is where he gets criticized. A lot of pro-life anti-abortionists, that's us, in many ways, this is where we get upset with Bernardin. Like, wait, you're diluting. And he's not diluting. That's not what he was doing. What he was trying to do was to avoid where we've gotten today, where abortion only is so politically divisive, even among believing Christians, Catholics, that there is not room for a conversation about life ethic. That's what we're going to talk about today, okay? So it was not until he was made Archbishop of Chicago a few years later that Cardinal Bernardin formally explained the concept of the consistent ethic of life. The threat of nuclear war in the early 80s, it spurred the bishops to consider way broader issues affecting human life. And part of that effort included the 1983 publication of a pastoral letter that was written by the cardinal, The Challenge of Peace, God's Promise, and Our Response. It's a great read. It's still relevant today. A few months later, Bernardin gave a lecture at Fordham University in which he laid out his vision in way more detail. And this is a really famous speech. So the thinking among those that were kind of drawn to Bernardin's formulation was that, quote, the church cannot be satisfied that every child conceived will be born and brought into a world where a moment later, a nuclear war might end human civilization. Okay, clarity on this, right? We can't be satisfied that we're so pro-birth that the quality of life, the imminent danger of hatred and violence is coming, but we have to be pro-birth even though we're welcoming them into destruction. That's what he's getting at here, which is a powerful line, still relevant today. Bishop Gerald Kakinis, who recently retired as the head of the Diocese of Tucson, was an auxiliary bishop in Chicago under Bernardin. And he said during a recent interview with America Magazine that the late cardinal, who passed away in 1996, was always criticized during his career for promoting the consistent ethic of life because of a misunderstanding about how the framework approached abortion. So he says, what Cardinal Bernardin was trying to emphasize in his efforts was seeing that all life issues are intertwined and that we have to see this as here it is, seamless garment. That's Kakinis who said that, okay? The seamless garment, this is a popular term. It's an image from the Gospels that the cardinal used to help explain the concept, which was picked up by the popular press following his 1983 speech. That image led a lot of people to believe that the cardinal believed all moral issues carried equal weight, which he did not. He did not believe that, nor was that ever publicly stated. No, protection of the innocent carries a lot of weight, but it's connected seamlessly to quality of life issues and end of life issues. We haven't even mentioned euthanasia and assisted living and those types of issues, okay? Bishop Kakinis said that some Catholics were not receptive to Cardinal Bernardin's message, and they accused him of trying to undermine church teaching on abortion, which is not true. One of the most painful things for Bernardin when he was talking about the seamless garment of the whole idea of seeking common ground was that there was such a reaction by some to that as if he had betrayed the teachings of the church. That's what Kakinis said about it. He said, you totally misunderstood his position. Now, the cardinal wanted to somehow kind of heal this polarization that already existed and sadly still exists, not only in the church, but certainly in the world as well. He wanted to heal. Like, wait a minute, it's not either or. It's never either or, okay? So the challenge for Bernardin was trying to find a way to make sure that the church is engaging the full range of issues and not getting stuck on one, no matter how important that issue is, okay? He contends that the consistent ethic of life deserves another look from a lot of Catholics, saying that as the Roe v. Wade decision approaches its 50th anniversary, it's clear that the tactics used by bishops on abortion have not persuaded people and instead really have succeeded to produce not much more than division. Okay, and that's important to note. And here's why that's important to note. The annual March for Life in Washington, it brings thousands to the National Mall every January. It's an amazing sight. The event it's not organized by a religious denomination. It's officially secular. Now, Catholics make up the backbone of the pro-life movement. The march is the most anticipated organizing date on the calendar for a lot of Catholic universities, high schools, diocesan youth ministry offices across the country. Buses arrive, packed with young people. The opening mass before the march at the Basilica, the National Shrine of the Immaculate Conception, it's broadcast live by the Catholic media empire EWTN. Catholic bishops view the anniversary of the Roe v. Wade Supreme Court decision that legalized abortion as an opportunity to preach, teach, and encourage political activism from state houses to Congress. All good. This is all good. This is yes to all of this. So the context of this makes a Catholic bishop's decision to boycott a local March for Life in Arkansas after organizers chose a death penalty supporter as the keynote speaker. It makes it all that much more remarkable and really important, okay? So the state's Republican Attorney General, Leslie Rutledge, quote, has good anti-abortion credentials, but otherwise is decidedly not an appropriate pro-life speaker. Bishop Anthony Taylor of Arkansas wrote in a letter to his diocese that week because she has, quote, worked tirelessly to secure the execution of 4 criminals who pose no further threat to society. Isn't that amazing? So the organization leading the march, Arkansas Right to Life, refused the bishop's request to find a new speaker. Now listen, the bishop emphasized in his letter, as you know, he says, the church teaches a consistent ethic of life in which human life and human dignity must be protected from the first moment of conception to natural death and every stage in between. And this means, among other things, the bishop says, that all lives have inherent God-given dignity. Even people who have been sentenced to death possess this dignity, which is why capital punishment must not be acknowledged. Now, here's the thing, friends. Nothing the bishop says here is groundbreaking. Nothing. He's simply articulating traditional Catholic social teaching. But the reason behind the bishop's decision not to attend the anti-abortion rally and the public nature of his opposition is significant for this sort of trajectory of church politics in the Pope Francis era. And it's a sign of a much more expansive value debate in secular politics. A bishop took a stand and said, we're not just about unborn babies. And that doesn't dilute the value of protecting the unborn. It celebrates the much needed attention for all life. It's a big deal. Listen, in the years following the death of Chicago Cardinal Joseph Bernardin, who championed this consistent ethic that connected a myriad of issues that threaten human dignity, the Cardinal's vision lost a lot of ground to church leaders who wanted to focus just on abortion. And those critics, from cardinals to Catholic intellectuals and activists all over the place, they feared that a seamless garment framework that situated abortion as part of other threats to life, that it diluted the church's primary role in defending the unborn. That's not Catholic teaching. That's political teaching. Let me be very clear about that. There's a guy, Diehl Hudson is his name. He's a Catholic advisor. He was a Catholic advisor to President George W. Bush. He described it this way in his book. It's called Onward Christian Soldiers, The Growing Political Power of Catholics and Evangelicals in the United States. He says, in spite of Bernardin's intentions, the broadening of the pro-life position enabled the Catholic conferences, state Catholic conferences that is, to back away from the abortion issue and distance themselves from pro-life activists who were demanding more action from the bishops. Hudson writes, the American bishops who truly can be credited for helping to lead the pro-life movement after Roe v. Wade gradually withdrew from the grassroots involvement to attend to what they considered larger matters. That's not church teaching. That's political commentary. That's political commentary. Hudson goes on to list as a notable exception to this supposed withdrawal the late Cardinal John O'Connor of New York, a favorite of Pope John Paul II, who became a towering figure in the pro-life movement. O'Connor famously clashed with Geraldine Ferraro, a pro-choice Catholic who ran for vice president in '84, and then frequently with at the time, New York Governor Mario Cuomo. George Weigel, a papal biographer of John Paul II, who had a lot of access to top officials in the Vatican during his pontificate, also pointed to the New York Cardinal in 2011 in his First Things essay, and he calls it the end of the Bernardin era. Weigel writes that O'Connor's staunch and unyielding pro-life activism as Archbishop of New York was crucial in keeping that issue alive at a moment when the pro-life energies of the American episcopate showed some signs of flagging. In doing so, O'Connor set in place one of the markers that would eventually help displace the Bernardin approach to the Catholic Church's interaction with U.S. public policy debate. Again, that's not Catholic teaching. That's George Weigel's teaching. And I respect Weigel, but let's not be confused here. Ditching the Bernardin model was a mistake, both tactically and morally. Abortion is still legal. And for decades, the church was way too often perceived in the popular imagination as certain political party at prayer. And that's not healthy. That's like, hey, let's trust in the secular strides of the world to make these changes happen. Instead of let's guide political structures. And this is what your church is actually teaching. This isn't just me giving conjecture. Listen, we have talked about this before on the show. Pope Francis and the bishops he's appointed have swung a momentum back to a consistent life ethic framework in ways that have implications for the church's political witness internationally, Americans, not just in the U.S. A pope who describes economic inequality, climate change, the plight of migrants, and the death penalty in strong pro-life terms makes it way harder for politicians to get a free pass simply by opposing abortion while doing nothing to build a culture of life. And this is the hot topic. This is the hot topic for us believers, us Catholics. San Diego Bishop Robert McElroy highlighted what this kind of Francis papacy means for the intersection of the Catholic Church and U.S. politics shortly after the Pope's election. He says, both the substance and methodology of Pope Francis' teachings on the rights of the poor have enormous implications for the culture and politics of the United States and for the church in this country. He goes on, he says, these teachings demand a transformation of the existing Catholic political conversation. It is not a single issue when we advocate for life. It is a social issue that affects war all the way to unborn babies, okay? Now listen, the death penalty needs to be a part of this renewed Catholic political conservation. It really does. State-sponsored execution is clearly a pro-life issue, but a lot of Catholics with access to political power have way too often refused to accept this. The National Catholic Prayer Breakfast, for example, it's an annual event in Washington that attracts members of Congress, judges, policymakers. They chose the governor of Texas to be the keynote speaker 2 years ago. Governor Greg Abbott, a Catholic, leads a state notorious for its number of executions. And during his campaign for governor, Abbott was asked about whether his Catholic faith and pro-death penalty position were in tension. And this is what he says. Catholic doctrine is not against the death penalty, and so there is no conflict here. And then he just kind of breezily told the San Antonio Press, the Express News editorial board, his answer conveniently distorts the essence of Catholic teaching, period. Now listen, the Catechism of the Catholic Church, while not excluding the use of capital punishment, it doesn't. If it is the only available recourse to protect society, quotes Pope John Paul II's encyclical, Evangelium Vitae, in affirming that those situations are, quote, very rare if practically non-existent. Now, during a 1999 visit to the United States, John Paul preached that the dignity of human life must never be taken away, even in the case of someone who has done great evil. Now, Pope Francis has gone even further, calling the death penalty inadmissible and contrary to the gospel. In fact, specifically, Pope Francis in 2018 says, the church could not remain in a neutral position in the face of today's demands to reaffirm personal dignity. In fact, Francis ordered a revision of the Catechism's paragraph on capital punishment, paragraph 2267, last August, to assert, quote, "The death penalty is inadmissible because it is an attack on the inviolability and dignity of the person." Okay. And then he says to commit the church to working towards its abolition worldwide is a priority. No more abortions, no more capital punishment, no more dismissing poor mothers with newborn babies, no more assisted suicide. This is the Catholic pro-life stance. It's centered in the sanctity of all human life, from the cradle to the grave. I think, guys, Catholics, listen, if we grab that, and that's our voice, a unified voice, a seamless garment voice that says an emphatic no to abortion. Yes, no more abortions, okay? And because we care so deeply for life and the politics that can better life, no to capital punishment, no to assisted suicide, no to the destruction of humanity across the board, our stance is not political. It will dictate a new politics. And I dare you to have the courage to put that into your vote. And it's hard to do. It's harder to do than to ally ourselves with a single aspect of a seamless garment. Thanks for listening. Sincerely, we're partners in the journey of faith. I hope you will share the Renovo podcast with friends and foes. Send your topic suggestions, questions, and or comments to doug@odbfilms.com. Always remember to engage the tradition and live the conversion. Until next time, God bless.